Hi, good afternoon, Kate and Simone. Thanks for joining in today. I'm going to be sharing my screen in a second. You see the presentation slide. So today we're going to be looking at covering Learning Outcome 4. It's going to be a bit of a same discussion that we had yesterday, but with a very different perspective in terms of yesterday, our session was to understand the growth and how the growth typically happens when we look at the early years from 0 to 7. So the idea there was to primarily look at covering, the development and the growth which the child experiences in the initial years from the age 0 to 7. And that was to look at, understanding bits and pieces in terms of, if I just bring that up, bits and pieces in terms of, understanding theoretical perspectives primarily, of childcare and child development, essentially in the early years, as we call them, 0 to 7 or years 2 to 8. And that focused on, predominantly understanding how the various psychologists, physiologists, and various people who have done a lot of research over the years in as early as the 19th century have given us theoretical idea or frameworks around how these phases of development can be studied and how they are classified. They were broadly classified into 4 areas. One which was related to the cognitive development. The second part was speech, language, and communication. Third was physical development. And the fourth was social and emotional development. Now, in today's session, we will dwell further on some of these theoretical frameworks, but with a twist. What we are looking at doing in today's discussion is going to be focused on how does a practitioner essentially, adjust to these years of development which is happening, or the phases through which these development of the early years is happening for a child, and what is the role that you play as a practitioner in this particular process. So the difference between yesterday's and today's learning outcome is predominantly twofold. Yesterday, we were looking at understanding the, the theory behind it, or research which has gone into understanding how the, growth happens, but across these phases. And today we would look at the role, understanding the growth across these 4 phases, but from a role of a practitioner. That means somebody who works in the early years, set up in the nursery, in after school club, in a school, as a teaching assistant, as a dinner lady, or somebody who works primarily in a nursery and looks after children between the age of 4 and 7, predominantly in the nursery between 3.5 to 7 or 8 years. So idea would be to try and understand that perspective, wherein somebody as a person, who's working in that setting, and how would I go about understanding these developmental phases, and then what would my role be in particular when we look at the practitioner's role, in terms of my role in the setting, in the earliest setting, to be able to work with children and understanding what are the various roles and responsibilities I would essentially carry out on a day-to-day basis. So one of the bits that we want to look at in particular is to try and understand, what could be the various activities which you as a practitioner would essentially end up taking when we talk about, these 4 broad phases of growth, which typically tend to happen. So these four broad phases of growth, when we discussed yesterday, just very briefly, when we talked about cognitive development in the early years, what we were referring to the development of child's reading, language, vocabulary, and numeracy skills. And that was important to understand, because how children put together, how they pick up the vocabulary, how they pick up the language, how they start speaking, and how they develop these skills essentially when we look at different settings. So we looked at various theories from Lev Vygotsky. We looked at Piaget's framework. We looked at Noam Chomsky's theory, and there were different theories which were or theoretical perspectives which were covered across 4 of these broad areas. So when we talk about speech and development in particular, In this case, we looked at a few theories which were predominantly, from I would say, excuse me, predominantly from Noam Chomsky, wherein he believed that there is an innate linguistic ability which the children are born with, and they have that ability to be able to start, speaking from day one. But it is the development of this speech which essentially allows them to, start talking or start, say from the initial stages, start babbling to start saying some of the words, copying or imitating some of the adults and some of the other peers which are in and around them in the external environment. And his theory was predominantly, based on the fact that we were looking at children essentially having the innate ability. That means they are born with the ability to be able to acquire language. And he called this as language acquisition device, or LAD. Now, when we talk about physical development, we looked at some of the work which has been carried out by Burrus Skinner, and we also looked at Lev's work, and then we compared Jerome Bruner's work with Skinner's work, wherein there were subtle differences that Jerome Bruner basically meant that the process of physical development happens throughout the life. The learning, it is a process the child gets into, and at some stage over the years between the age of 2 to 8, then 8 to 11, 11 to 16, the continuous growth of physical development keeps happening within children. And he basically, basically recommended that there are bits and pieces that we start off with in the early years when we work as a practitioner, wherein we are looking at working with symbols, sign, pictures, props, to be able to get attention for some of the, some of the activities we want children to participate in. We also, discussed the bits in terms of physical development, wherein we looked at Arnold Gesell's and Frederick Frobel's work, wherein they've also, essentially provided some theoretical background, because some of their work was carried out in the initial, 19th, early 18th and 19th century. And obviously, they did discuss and propose what is called the development schedules, and these come across in 6 different phases. And according to them, obviously physical development tends to happen throughout the life of the individual. And in their case, when they basically propose these as I would say, changes which tend to happen even in the individual, when the individual is in the state wherein they are 60 years and beyond. So they divided 0 to 2, then 3 to 8, 11 to 16, and then 16 to 24, and then 24 to 15, 39, or I think 49, and then upwards of 60. So we looked at various of these perspectives, essentially from a theoretical point of view, to understand who has carried out what kind of work, how the research has been done, and why it is relevant to the discussion and study of the early years of development as far as children are concerned, from conception to year 7. Now, in the emotional part of it, we looked at Erickson's theory, wherein he talked about the building of trust, mistrust, and he proposed certain models wherein he says during the first year, it is a case wherein the child is essentially developing trust. Between the age of 1 and 3, it is more of self-reliance and doubt. And then between the age of 3 and 6, it is more about initiative and guilt. So he came up with some of these phases, which are now widely accepted in terms of how we see social and emotional part of it, social and emotional part of development essentially happening within, I would say children between the age of 0 to 7 years. Now, there were a couple of charts which I put forward, and obviously some handouts which I've uploaded. They give you a bit more summarized information in terms of what were the experiments, how the research was carried out, and what were the variables put into place by them before they carried out this particular research. And these essentially then relate to how these findings have then been tabled and accepted, because they make sense from a point of view of how we see growth happening in children during the initial years. So a revised version of this presentation, has also been put up on Moodle, and this revised version of the presentation, if I just very briefly bring it across onto the screen, wherein what I've done is I've added some visual features of why we look at these different theoretical perspectives. We discuss the chart for charting out the physical growth, which is important, and then differences between some of the various approaches which have been proposed. If there were multiple approaches proposed in each of the development phases, like cognitive development, there are two parallel approaches, one from Lev and the other from Paishet. Now, in terms of some of the cognitive development, there is additional work which is done by Lev, and he has proposed 4 elementary side of things which are covered here. So there are some visual elements that I've added to the presentation, primarily to ensure that you are able to get hold of the key aspects of why some of these theoretical frameworks are important, and why they have become synonymous when we study the child development from early years, from the conception to the age of 7. So these have then been substantiated with a bit of handouts which are across these 4 areas, and these 4 handouts with the 4 main sets of handouts are also available now on Moodle for you to be able to go ahead and read. Now, after having discussed all this, what we have done what we have to do in today's learning outcome, which is learning outcome 4, is essentially to understand the role of the practitioner. What is the role of the practitioner in this particular setup, in terms of, if I have to say that you would need to be aware of, say, for example, some of these frameworks, and how do we use them now to put it into practice. So some of the things that we are looking at, discussing today would be to see it from the viewpoint of how you would be, if somebody is working within a setup, then within this particular setup, when you're working, how you would go about essentially using some of these frameworks to use it to your benefit, and observe, contribute, and obviously then do the roles and responsibilities that you've been given from a point of view of, helping in the looking after, or helping in, playing your bit in terms of your role for the purposes of development. Now, the first part that we will look at, primarily will be the role of practitioner in the cognitive development of the child. So when we talk about cognitive development, we think of, skills which are predominantly required or necessary for the purposes of language, vocabulary, numeracy, reading. And when we do talk about these skills, what we are looking at is the role of practitioners in the early years becomes importantly, very vital. And this is because that the person who is working with children should be able to recognize that these are the basic strengths and weaknesses of the child. This is their current understanding, and their achievement in terms of where we want to take them as per a plan, we need to very clearly define. And that would be the steps which the practitioner helps the child to take, so that they are continuing with the process of development on the 4 aspects. The 4 aspects that we talk about, which is physical, cognitive, emotional, social, and obviously speech and language and, communication development. So this part is quite important, because the role of the practitioner in cognitive development is seen as a very crucial part in the early childhood education. And there are, let's put it this way, that when we look at the role of the practitioner, they are going to be pivotal in shaping the way children come up with the abilities in the future to be able to then, develop a language, communicate their vocabulary, and obviously, in terms of the numerical skills or numeric skills that they would have at some stage later in life. Now, what are the various things that the practitioner is required to do? One of the things that you will see the practitioner is required to do is they are required to observe. They observe children in various different settings. That could be in a nursery, in a playgroup, in an activity area outside, in the class, or just generally in as observing them, from a point of view of, observing them amongst their peer group. Now, what they're going to be able to do by that observation is they're going to be able to gain a lot of information about how the child interacts, what the child does, what are the things which kind of tick, and some of the things which do not gel well or blend well with the way the child is actually being a part of the class or obviously within the environment. And what they're going to then do is use these observations that they note to obviously make notes, and they would be useful then to basically plan some sort of or inform some sort of planning which they will do in order to put the child onto a journey wherein that journey would take them and help them with activities, resources. When I say activities and resources, these are activities that would be carried out in the class with peers, in the internal environment, external environment, by parents, by friends, family members. And then we look at resources, which could be things which the child might need in terms of toys, the play area, for example, ability to be able to go out and, participate in certain outdoor activities. These kind of resources would then be noted down, and what they would try and do is create a match to understand whether these resources and activities are optimal to aid the development of the child when we look at the cognitive side of things, which is language, communication, reading, and numeracy skills. So an example here that I would give is normally what you would see in term one. For example, if I work within a nursery and I handle, and work with children, and I am one of the teachers who basically spends about, good 2.5 hours with them, with some breaks in the middle during the course of the day. I am then responsible for essentially working with them to help carry out activities which are going to make them a bit more creative. Activities which would involve, for example, drawing, activities which would involve, for example, understanding vocabulary, building some sort of semblance with the language, which is making them learn alphabet and letters using props. My aim would then be to look at identifying what props the children like, what resources they are able to work with and they get excited about when it comes to starting a class or a session with you. And in some cases you would also be observing, for example, things which would be encouraging them to be a part of that class, play a vital or play an active role in that class. Those would then be things that you would pick out as activities and note them down against individual students, or when I say children in this case, and that would allow you to do thorough planning, which will essentially allow you to create activities which are going to be able to engage with every child within that class. And those activities that you plan, you start with maybe some visual activities, some props. Then in the second week or the third week, you go into some writing and drawing. In the fifth or the sixth weeks, then you go into testing, whether they're able to draw and understand what they are drawing. And then in the last week of the term, you're going to be actually putting them through the test to see whether they've developed this skill of drawing, whether they're able to use colors and color properly, or whatever was the objective of the activity. So in such cases, the observations would essentially help the practitioner in building activities which can then be scaffolded to allow the learners to essentially develop these skills which are required for cognitive development, which is skills related to numeracy, literacy, communication in particular, and last but not the least, language, which is speech and language development. Now, one other thing which I would suggest when we look at one of the important activities which practitioners do in the case of cognitive development would be that there is a lot of role play which is normally done. So what you would generally see in nurseries or children with the age group of between I would say 3 to 8 years, you would generally see that a lot of role plays are done by the teachers, and these role plays become essential element of cognitive development, because through this playful exercise, what children are able to do is they are learning to experiment, they are learning to solve problems, and they are also able to develop various cognitive skills which will actually help shaping up, well, at some stage, it will help shape up their personality. So the role play becomes a very essential element of cognitive development and is one of the activities which is always there in some shape or form. And that allows, the children at this age to engage. Some of them could be shy, some of them could be, very forthcoming, but what it will allow them to do is primarily look at, um, you know, um, participating actively, and that would allow in the development of their abilities, which will include knowledge, gaining knowledge. It will include, for example, say, for example, even a bit of, let's say, skillful. I wouldn't probably use the word planter, but I would say, basically allow them essentially to look at exploring, helping to solve problems when they work together in small groups. And some of these activities, when planned properly, would also allow them to memorize some of the things which are required for them to be able to develop these cognitive skills. So understanding this process becomes crucial for people who are in education, and also crucial for people which are related to obviously the children themselves, like family members, parents, and obviously what they would want to do at some stage would be to nurture this particular ability through, through them when the children are interacting with them or spending time with them, and helping them develop some of these cognitive development skills which are, required for them in the early years to, start laying down I would say, a good foundation. Is that okay? Is this understood?
Yeah.
Right. The second part that we look at in terms of, when we talk about speech, language, and communication development, what we need to be able to do is think of situations where you would, as a practitioner, as a person working within this particular setup, require to do what is called, communication, and obviously, let's say, communication and obviously language development, and, speak to them, or, basically encourage them to talk to each other. Generally, when you see speech, we talk about things like, in the initial years, children would be generally, gargling, and they would be, and then their vocabulary tends to be, they are trying to speak, but obviously because they don't know the words, and their vocabulary is almost not there at this stage. That is where some of the noises that they create, or for example, babbling that they do, they are trying to experiment with the idea of essentially, creating a sound or producing a sound. And sometimes when we see in the initial years, very, very initial years, after birth, between 0 to 1, you would generally see the child normally ends up, only crying up to the age of, I would say 3 to 4 months. After that, the child, when they start to sit up and sit, they still haven't found their motor skills. So what tends to happen is, if they lean forward, they bend towards that. If they lean backward too much, they, obviously can bang their head onto the floor. So that's why when you look at play areas, or, activities wherein these, I would say children between the 0 and 1 are actually put, you generally see that some of these surfaces are designed in a way wherein they are able to absorb the impact, and obviously does not create any hurt for the child. So in some of these cases, you would see that when they get used to, being able to manage certain objects, or keep their posture, or retain their posture, what you would generally see is that they would start to speak. And that is where the innate ability of, linguistic model of children being able to speak, they start talking ma, ma, da, da, and they start pronouncing, imitating sounds. And that is where you see the initial beginnings of speech and coming language essentially coming into the children. Now, when we do talk about, that particular bit, we need to think of activities which practitioners would actually carry out. And these practitioners, what kind of activities do you think they will carry out essentially when we look at speech, language, and, communication? Any ideas? What do you think would be the activities that you could carry out?
Watching cartoon like musical cartoon like 1, 2, 3, ABC, other thing. They help her to talk.
That is absolutely great. Yes. So one of the things that you normally look at is with the use of symbols, charts, music, objects, you get their attention and obviously try and get them to concentrate on, using some of these objects. Or in some cases, if they're watching TV, then the idea would be they are able to, listen using their senses, eyes, they're seeing, with the ears, they're hearing, but obviously with hands, they want to touch and feel. And obviously, when we look at that particular process through which they go through and understand that, yes, these are the things that I can do, or this is what I can relate to, or this is what I'm seeing, or this is the sound that I'm hearing, what you generally see that the children tend to start making efforts to speak, or making efforts essentially to look at trying to communicate. So sometimes you would see when you put children in a playgroup area between the age of 0 and 2, or say between the age of 0 and 2 and 5, what you will generally see is when they are in a play area, they're in a particular setting. Sometimes you would see the children don't even talk to each other. What they'll do is they'll hold the hands, or they'll put a hand on the shoulder, they'll pull something, and that is a way that they're trying to say that this is what I want to do, or this is what I intend to do. And sometimes you would see that they will come and close and hug you from the back. And these are kind of activities they are trying to do is because they want to show verbally that this is what they want to do or how they would like to do. But because their language and vocabulary skills are limited, so some part of these are generally done through actions. Now, one of the things that we've learned from research is that between the age of 0 and 2, children are able to have a memory or a vocabulary of up to 50 words. And between the age of 2 and 5, they will develop a vocabulary of up to 1,000 words. And this is what is going to aid in the speech, language, and communication development of the child. Excuse me. So initially, when you look at how they would how they would communicate is they would use non-verbal language or mediums through which they would want to communicate, wherein the use of hand gestures, that is where the importance of the practitioner comes in, is because the practitioner would use different type of symbols, charts, diagrams, props, essentially to be able to get their attention and get them to understand that this is what they need to do. So when you said when they look at TV and when you look at, thank you, when you look at TV and when you look at putting, say, putting some sort of a documentary or a visual in front of them, it immediately grabs their attention. And that is where it starts off with the development of what is called the non-verbal communication techniques. And this would be when they see, observe, hear, touch, and feel, and understand how they would want to work around that or work with that. An example that I gave yesterday was when you look at children between the age of 0 and 2, because their sensory and motor and fine motor skills are not developed that much, sometimes you would see they will try and pick up a heavy object or a glass without having to realize the weight of the object. And then when they pick it up, it slips through their hand. And when it breaks or when it makes a loud noise, you would see the child suddenly starts crying. So in such cases, the role of the practitioner would be to help in the development of speech, language, communication skills. You would also see that sometimes you're being cautious, and what you will do is if they pick it up, you let them pick it up, but you're around them. You go around. If they start walking, you start walking with them to ensure that they don't drop it or they don't hurt themselves. And that is where you generally get to see this process of non-verbal communication starting to happen at the very, very initial stages. Now, when we go into understanding that yes, there is now the child is actually in the nursery, and when we look at early years in terms of their development, what we want to understand is that once they are in a nursery or in a setting wherein they are being supervised and there are specialist people around them, which are teachers, which are eligible, and obviously they are having the relevant qualifications to be able to work with early years with children in the early years. and having this kind of a qualification, the award or a certificate to work with work within a childcare setting, and then also be a practitioner, helping them to gain, skills, education during these early years. You would see that children also tend to start then asking open-ended questions. So not children, practitioners would tend to ask open-ended questions so that children are actually encouraged to participate in those activities so that they are using some of their skills to be able to answer or pick out a prompt, or, pick out a particular prompt to show that this is the answer. Sometimes you would see in the class or in a classroom or a playful area or a setting that the practitioner would essentially say, can you pick up a round object? So what you're expecting them to do is pick up a ball or some sort of a round object and then show it. And that is where it will start helping them to develop, the language skills. And then what they do is they start imitating others when they are in a particular environment for a couple of hours. So what you would generally see is that the accent and the type of words that they are trying to speak, or the way they would try to speak, would be very closely related to somebody who's already within that environment. And what they're doing is observing and then basically, trying to imitate that. And that would also help in the, development of communication.
Ramon, I just want to ask here, would this also include things like when you're doing your phonics time, and you're talking about the sounds that things make. So we play games with the children, like you're going to have a word, and we show an image with a word that says cup, and we get them to practice saying cup, and then we then get them to try and see if they can match other words that sound similar, that also have that sort of up sound, but maybe has a different first letter. Is that the sort of thing that would fall into this category here?
Absolutely, yes. So it will fall into this particular category, because what will be happening is that sometimes you help in the development of phonetics, as you mentioned, and you would basically play along with an activity wherein you'll encourage them to, start talking and, let's say, saying those words in a way. And that would be one of the activities which, practitioners would essentially do. Absolutely correct. So it could be number of activities that you end up doing in order to ensure that at some stage you are able to, let's put it this way, engage with them, and then somehow help them essentially to, develop this particular bit of, being able to use some of their senses to then start speaking or building a language wherein they would want to start to communicate, encouraging them by these activities. So that's perfect. Yes. Now, it could also mean that sometimes, so we think of some of these activities. For example, as you rightly said, building language skills would also mean that you would encourage them to start drawing, or, picking up props, or obviously playing in certain activities when you're singing a song or a poem, or, something of that sort, which allows them to engage verbally with you, wherein that would mean that they are trying to speak or imitate or, bring out these words. And that is where the practitioner's, ability to plan some of these activities helps in the development of speech, language, and, communication. We would also say to a certain extent that when we do talk about the role of, practitioners, specifically in the early years, when they are looking at helping the children between the age of 2 to 7, 2 to 8, to develop their speech, language, and communication skills, they would also look at role modeling. They would do a lot of role plays and exercises, which will be essentially based on role modeling. They would look at providing a lot of opportunities to children by conducting activities which would be more requiring verbal communication. You would generally see practitioners, they speak in a very clear tone, and the pronunciation of the words tends to be quite methodic and, accurate. And the practitioner then maintains an eye contact with the child, when they're trying to help the child speak that particular word. So maintaining eye contact and being very clear in terms of your speech, using body gestures or gestures essentially like facial expressions. You would generally see that if a word is very difficult or is difficult in the sense that the child is not able to pronounce or say it properly, then you are going to use facial expressions and body gestures to be able to help the child accommodate and obviously then pronounce and bring out those words. And once you can see that they brought it out, it becomes easier for them to say it again and use it time and again in conversations. You're also going to be focused on, I think one of the things which I see very clearly is that you plan activities which you think children would be interested in. Mostly children are always interested in drawing, playing, going outdoor for some sort of an activity. And that is where the activities, the reason why they enjoy these activities is because these activities tend to make them quite happy. They feel that they can enjoy carrying out some of these activities and it allows them to gain new experiences. So some of the planning part of it, wherein it'll help in speech, language, and communication for children, would be to plan these activities which are going to be enjoyable and plan these activities which will ask for participation. And that would be, an important role which the practitioner will also play. Sometimes I've seen in settings that when you do plan activities, the practitioners would be imitating, echoing, or for example, mirroring some of the actions which the child is doing. And especially so in the case when you find somebody being quite naughty or not, they're not falling in line and they're doing things which are not required to be done, you would generally imitate, mirror, or, let's say, echo some of the things that they are doing, which would discourage them and, bring them in line with what the others are expected to do or what is expected of them in that particular, role. And that is seen when you take kids out or children out for outdoor activities. You normally put them in a single file. And then if somebody falls out of that file, they say, no, get back into the file. And that is where you are essentially, also instilling the idea that discipline is something important, and not everything would require communication, but sometimes the teacher is sitting, and if you imagine you're sitting in an auditorium and there's a play or some sort of an activity which is being done during a event, and what teachers would normally do is keep a track on their children that they are working with when they're sitting in a particular row, and if from the front or from the side, they will normally put a finger on their lips and say quiet, and that would send a message to the child to say that, okay, I don't need to talk, I don't need to gossip, and I need to just concentrate and expect them to do what they are expected to do in that particular activity. So some of these you would see between the age groups of 0 and 2, some are between 0 to 5, or 2 to 5, some between 5 to 8, but they will tend to vary. And essentially the whole aspect here is that the role of the practitioner is very important because they are going to be helping children in the initial years to have an understanding or build an understanding of how they would be looking at speech, language, and communication when it comes to a formal setting or an environment like a daycare or after school club, or maybe sitting in a classroom, or in a similar setting. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes, thanks.
The third part that we're going to look at is the role of practitioner in physical development. Now, this part comes to us quite naturally because at the end of the day, we see a lot of time that we spend with children in the early years, specifically in nursery kind of settings. You generally see that a lot of activities are planned and a lot of physical activities are planned because children are full of energy. And obviously what they would love to do more than anything else is the idea that they would want to go out, play, experience, dance, or, jump in the rain, or, puddles and things like that. Now, again, this varies between the various age groups. So obviously, when I'm talking about some of these activities, they are basically more tuned in line with children which are between the age groups of 4 and 8 or 4 and 7, and they have gone into some sort of a nursery setting. Now, a practitioner's role in promoting physical development would be through physical education or PE that we get to see, which starts up at a very young age. In any sort of a setting, whether it's an after-school club, a school, nursery, or any sort of a setting where the children would normally go. Even that could include fun clubs, for example. Sometimes they go to theme parks with parents or their families. But yes, it plays a very vital part in the development of their physical, aspect in terms of developing their body, muscles, brain, and some of the things that they do, which are related to the physical aspect of it. Now, what we would want to look at is when we talk about the role of practitioners, we are looking at the role of practitioners from a point of view of how would they promote physical play, which would essentially aid in developing motor skills or skills which are required primarily for them to be able to understand and take advantage of some of the let's say some of the activities they would want to go in and do. So when we talk about um, early years, and we talk, say, from the age group of 2 to 7, you generally see children engage and practitioners engage in physical activity or physical play. And that would be to help in some of the activities that you plan would be physical in the nature. That means they would help in the development of muscle and bone structure. So, for example, physical exercise, you would generally see children are asked to do some sort of an exercise or follow a routine every day in the morning when they go to an after school club or a nursery. And that would be to help in the uh, generally saying that will help them to stay healthy. And it's a routine or a schedule that you're trying to build in because and what research proves is that this is a healthy routine which every individual needs to have at some stage or the other. You'd also look at, the practitioners helping in, development of important skills like coordination. For example, hand-eye coordination. So teaching children in this age from 0 to 7 how to catch a ball. For example, if you throw an object, you're wanting to catch it. So developing coordination between your hand and eye is going to be quite important. And some of the activities which we do aid in this physical development is to, kind of look at developing some sort of coordination going between hands and your eyes to be able to participate or, to be able to carry out some of these day-to-day activities. Again, some of the other points that I would say is that when we talk about, mental health and well-being, the physical aspect of it is going to be very important because exercise plays a very vital part and a very important role in our lives because that allows you to keep mentally and physically fit. It essentially also, is a way through which I would say children would exercise and be mindful of, what are the healthy habits versus the unhealthy habits that they can fall very easily prey to. So, for example, in this case, you would generally see that if if there are children which struggle with, say, for example, let's say coordination skills, what the practitioners essentially then do is create and help children participate in a lot of outdoor physical activities. And these would essentially be activities like hopscotch, which we've all played, in the school or during our child years, early years. And then there could be certain activities which are related to, running or part and parcel of, activities which could be carried out in a particular location outside the classroom, which would essentially be helpful to develop what is called muscles, in general, the bone structure. And that is nothing but fine motor skills or, coordination skills that they would want to develop between their hands and the various senses in order to be able to respond and, adapt to situations accordingly. So in this case, what we do see is indoor and outdoor activities which are planned by practitioners play a very important part in the physical development of the child in the early years between the age group of 2 to 7. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Last but not the least, we look at, social and emotional development. So when we do talk about social and emotional development, what we are looking at is understanding how does the child essentially create a bond of trust between the people that it deals and interacts with, and to a certain extent, I would say the people that work with the child during this initial years from, I would say, age 2 to 7. So what practitioners here would be essentially looking at is supporting and helping in the social and emotional development needs which the child may have. And that would be to say that your ability to be able to learn and enable children to learn and empathize with each other would be, an example of this particular scenario. That it is helping in the development of social and emotional development of the child. So what we are looking at is that if we do see that children are able to learn to empathize with others, and they are telling the, obviously saying this through the route of telling stories or scenarios being given, then in such cases, children would be able to relate to those scenarios or emotional situations and understand that this is what needs to be done in such a situation. So, what we want to do in the social and emotional development essentially is to give the child the opportunity to recognize and understand how feelings and emotions are going to be helping them to understand and deal with others. So when we look at the role of practitioner, it can have various responsibilities in this particular area. It could be that the practitioner's responsibility is to provide a very nurturing environment. That means you would want, the young children at this age to be able to understand that they have what are called needs, and these needs could be physical needs, cognitive needs, social needs, or emotional needs. And having a sense of security at this end, would be beneficial for the children's social and emotional development. The other thing that we look at is that in some cases you would see that encouraging these children to explore and look at the let's say look at self, look at honestly themselves being able to carry out some of the activities would help in the development of self-confidence and emotional resilience. Now, what I would also do is at this stage, as a practitioner, when I'm observing them to carry out some of these activities, as long as they're able to carry it out safely, what I would then also do is basically, to a certain extent, encourage them to be able to let's say, um, develop a bond with other individuals or other peers within the same setup that they're dealing with. And praising and encouraging would be one other way wherein they would essentially be looking at, boosting the self-esteem, but also at the same time they are growing economically, or not economically, sorry, emotionally, because of the fact that they are having to understand that these actions would lead to this particular outcome, and this would cause some sort of a distress or some sort of let's say on the other flip side, emotional involvement with the children. Now, one of the things which practitioners will also do is basically help them manage feelings. How would they do that? Generally, you see children at this age, between the age of 2 to 8, they start to become quite friendly with other children when they are in the same room or the area. They start holding hands, they start hugging each other. So the practitioner's role here is to go and, make sure that they sit and understand that you're in a classroom. This is something you cannot do. And we generally see that this is what people do when they're working within the setting. They pick out the person and say, no, John, no, you cannot do this. And you normally use your hand gestures or your face, which is moving left and right, to emphasize the fact that, this is something that would have this repercussion. So the reward and punishment, carrot and stick approach tends to work in this way, because the idea of creating fear that this is something which is not going to have a good consequence or would have a negative consequence when you do this, then that is something which is also done by practitioners, because that enables you to get their attention. And that would mean that sometimes they would also start to understand their feelings, and their feelings would then, they would require them to manage their feelings. And this would be something which the practitioners would help them develop. How do you look at something that you don't like, or how do you look at something that you like, and but you then manage it through your feelings, and obviously communicate in a way which is going to essentially, let's say, help the child create some sort of emotional bond, or some sort of a social bond with you. And if you're seen as supportive, then what you're going to see is you're going to be closely bound, I would say you would create a close bound with the bond, essentially, with the learner or the children in this case, because they will see you as their savior. They would see you as somebody who does not mind, if they commit any mistakes, or they, fall out of line. But what you would do is basically give them a necessary warning in one way or the other, and then obviously they would still then bond with you and, stay with you. So in such cases, you would look at the role of practitioner being crucial, because it helps to foster social and emotional development of children by looking at creating a supportive environment, and that would be promoting independence, and in some cases teaching them essential emotional and social skills, thereby they becoming closer to the child in terms of being able to depend on, and that is what basically helps create that emotional bond between the teacher and the child. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Roman. I just wanted to ask, with the social and emotional development, would you then recommend also using visuals for with happy faces, sad faces, upset faces, and things like that to help with the children understand their emotions, and what they're doing might not be correct or something like that? Is that something that you'd recommend then?
I think I would say definitely yes, because there's, in this particular, when we look at the curriculum, the way it has been planned in the early years, is there's a combination of some of these things which are done in order to, help in that particular development. And when you look at the use of posters, images, props, in combination with visual aids, which are typically, now a part and parcel of most nurseries and after school clubs. So you have a proper structured sitting area or a viewing area wherein they will be taken to like an auditorium. They'll watch a bit of a clip or a movie, and then obviously that would be explained further with the use of props, posters, and then in some cases the use of magnetic stickers and other bits, so that you encourage the activity in terms of the child coming forward towards that particular board or the area, and then participating by saying, okay, this is what I like, or this is what I don't like. And those kind of activities would be something which will be also a part, as you rightly said. It depends on how much improvisation is done within a particular setting in that area, or depending on the child group, the age group of the child that you're dealing with, and they would then be used appropriately depending on the age group that you're working with, and the ability of the age group to be able to understand those activities.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so this bit is what we want to look at, understanding when we talk about the role of social and emotional development. We have the listen, observe model, which is listen, observe, teach model. And that model tends to be that the practitioners generally need to be what are called very good listeners. And in most cases, they would be very good observers. So sometimes when you see when children are left alone in a play area, they get into a brawl, or they start fighting about something which everybody wants. And being observant and skillful in being observant, you would allow you to mitigate and obviously, let's say diffuse those situations. In some cases, when children are asked to, in this age group of say between the age group of 4 to 8, they're asked to lead or follow some of the activities. You would generally see a teacher walks in the front. There's one which will walk in the middle of the line, and there'll be somebody towards the end, so that if anybody falls out or anybody tries or has any different ideas, then those could be controlled and managed pretty much straight away without having any sort of a repercussion or an effect on what the child might be doing at that point in time when they are falling out or not falling into a particular process which has been asked for. And in some cases, you generally see that in such cases, teachers normally create a model. That means you are going to be using somebody or, essentially saying that today, Rahul has done extremely good. So he's given a chocolate. So you create an example out of it or a role model out of it. You might say, okay, today Aisha has done very well. She's made the best drawing. And as a result, she gets a reward today. And that would be the positioning which the practitioner is doing by encouraging the right attributes as against some of the attributes which you do not want the do not want the children to do. So listen, observe, and teach model tends to be a good technique to help in development of social and emotional bonds and connections between the teacher and also in this case practitioner in the early years with the children that you're working and managing with. So with this, we come to the end of our discussion. So this particular part is focused on thinking about activities that you would carry out across 4 different phases of child development: cognitive, speech, language, communication, physical, and social and emotional development. Now, if there are activities that you do and these activities are with a certain particular age group, my suggestion would be to keep them to hand. Be mindful of that some of these would be required to be covered as activities when you do the assignment tasks for related to the assessment criteria of learning outcome 4. And if you bring across something which is practical, something that you've been using, carrying out, and has been very successful within the age group that you work with, whether it's 0 to 2 or 2 to 4 or 4 to 8 years, depending on the setting that you work in, it would come in quite handy. And this is again going to be, more or less a practical element. That means you would explain this, that this is how you do this particular, activity, and then evidence it with that, okay, this is what the evidence is that I've used and I've done. And here is the evidence to show that this is how I've done it. And that would allow you to, comprehensively cover this particular outcome, which is understanding the role of the practitioner in the development of early years between the age of 0 and 7. Is that okay?
Yes.
I'm going to upload a few set of activities. Basically, there are 1 or 2 good sites which a lot of practitioners essentially use. One of such site is called Twinkle, TW. So if I put it this way, one of the things that I would ask you to do is basically go to the website or visit the website, which is called Twinkle, which I normally look at quite a lot. It's called Twinkle, which is spelled like this, .co.uk. This particular site has lots of charts, lots of different activities which practitioners essentially use in the early years, and you would be able to use this as a repository. If you start working in a particular setup, then there are lots of activities which are available, apps which are available, depending on different age groups that you work with, 3 to 5, 5 to 7, 8 to 11, 11 to 16. So these activities would be quite useful if you go through some of them on this particular site, which will be directly connected to, getting an idea of what we've covered in learning outcome 4. But essentially, you'll have to just keep that in mind that if you work within a certain age group within this early years, then you have to look at those activities and not the activities in generic sense, because when we look at early years, we classify them into different, categories. So I would say 0 to 2, which is predominantly going to be at home with parents, with near dear ones, with family members. And those activities tend to be generally a play area on the baby cot, or essentially within the pram when you see some props and other bits being used, and obviously being in front of the TV and sitting in a baby chair. But when you look at activities that would be carried out to help in the larger development of cognitive, speech, physical as well as social and emotional development, you will normally see the age group of, between 4 to, I would say between the age group of 3 to 8. And that is where when the child starts to use language and, starts to build a vocabulary and they are able to communicate or speak back or imitate your expressions to, convey what they are feeling and what they are thinking. And that would be useful when you go onto this particular website to shortlist some of the activities as examples to understand this learning outcome.
Okay, Raman, with that, can I just ask, do we just choose, say, one activity? I'm working with 3-year-olds, so do we say just choose one activity and explain that in the detail with regards to all the points mentioned? Or do we have to do for 3-year-olds, or do we have to do for the 3-year-olds, for the, maybe 5-year-olds or section age, or is it just one?
You would essentially do one activity and you define that what age group that you're working with, and that would be good enough, because I don't expect that you would be covering all the activities during this age group or, all the age groups, and then for each age group mention an activity. Session here would be to choose the age group that you are comfortable with or you're working with, and then using that, what you're doing is essentially bringing out one activity which can relate to physical, which could relate to speech, communication, and one could be social, or emotional, and the last one could be cognitive development.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. So that brings us to the end of this particular session today, wherein we have covered learning outcome 4. And what I'm going to do is, from the site Twinkle, I have got a number of activities which I think are going to fall within what we have discussed and cover these 4 areas broadly. I'm going to try and upload some handouts which are going to be PDF or Word documents that I can find, and those would be the document or activities that you could look at if you feel it's appropriate for the age group that you are going to cover later when we discuss the assignment. So we've got learning outcome 5 to cover, which is what we are going to do next week on Wednesday. And on Thursday, what we're going to do is do the assignment discussion for the unit 1.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I'll get this recording and the handouts put up. I'm going to insert some bits and pieces into the slides, so I'll upload the changed presentation as well in a couple of minutes after the session, and I'll see you guys next week.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
Take care. Thank you.